Story 1, Wishing Well. Many years ago, there was an exclusive boarding school in England that had its own scout troop. The troop was led by a teacher, and once a month, he would take the boys on a weekend camping trip. Among the scouts was a boy named Stanley Jenkins, a constant troublemaker, disobedient, loud, and always stirring up mischief. No matter how many times the teacher scolded him, Stanley never listened. One weekend, the troop went camping in the English countryside. They had permission to set up camp on a farmer's land on a ridge that overlooked a deep, shadowy valley. Before anything began, the teacher gave the boys a stern warning. Do not wander off on your own, and under no circumstances are you to go down into that valley. While the teacher and some scouts were busy pitching tents, Stanley Jenkins and his usual gang lounged in the grass, unwilling to help. Instead, they searched for ways to get into trouble. Stanley's eyes wandered to the valley below, where he spotted a field surrounded by barbed wire. In one corner stood an old stone well, half swallowed by weeds and brambles. Moments later, the farmer came walking by with his dog. Stanley, always bold, waved and called out, "What's in that field down there?" he asked. "The one with the well?" "That's the wishing well," the farmer replied. "But you're not allowed down there. I hope your teacher told you that." "Wishing well?" Stanley repeated. "You mean throw in some coins and make a wish?" The farmer let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Wouldn't know," he said. "That's what folks call it, but nobody around here goes near it. I've lived here all my life, and I've never set foot in that field." "What's wrong with it?" Stanley asked, curiosity piqued. "All I know is the cows and sheep avoid it. Even my old dog won't set foot near that well. They say it's haunted." Stanley snorted. "Haunted? By who?" "3 women and a man," the farmer said, his voice dropping. "Who were they?" "It happened before my time," the farmer said, "but they died in the well, or were found dead in it. I saw them once. I was standing right here on this ridge. It was twilight. My old dog saw them too. They came crawling out of the bushes, 4 of them, just black rags and white bones. I could hear their bones clacking as they moved. Couldn't see their faces, only their teeth." The boys around Stanley gasped. "What happened then?" Stanley asked. "I didn't stick around to find out," said the farmer. "My dog ran, and I ran after him. Take my advice, boys. Stay clear of that wishing well if you know what's good for you." With that, the farmer tipped his hat and walked away. The boys watched him go. "What a load of bull," Stanley muttered. "I don't believe a word of it." The next evening, the teacher gathered the boys for roll call and immediately noticed someone was missing. A quick head count confirmed it. Stanley Jenkins was gone. No one seemed to know where he was, until one scout nervously raised his hand. "Maybe he went down to the wishing well, sir," the boy said. The teacher's face turned pale. "The wishing well? But I told you all not to go down there." Without wasting a second, he marched the boys to the ridge and looked down into the valley. Dusk had fallen. The air was cold and still. "Can anyone see him?" the teacher asked. "There he is," one boy cried. "He's climbing over the barbed wire fence." "Yes, that's him," said another. "I recognize his sweater. He's heading straight for the well." "That little fool," the teacher muttered. Suddenly a scream cut through the silence. One of the scouts had covered his eyes. "What's that black thing on the path?" cried another boy. "It's crawling. It's a woman on all 4s. Oh God, don't let me look at her." "Enough," the teacher barked. "Get a hold of yourselves. I'm going down there. Hancock Fartleby, run to the farmer's house and call for help. The rest of you stay put." The teacher took off down the ridge, leaving the frightened boys alone, staring at the field below. To their horror, they saw another black figure emerge from the bushes. Then, another. And another. Stanley was still walking toward the wishing well, unaware of the shadowy figures shuffling toward him with outstretched arms. The boys screamed, trying to warn him. Just as he reached the well, Stanley seemed to hear them. He stopped, turned, And then he screamed. A shriek so sharp and terrifying it froze the boys where they stood, but it was already too late. The black figures closed in, surrounded him. Then they attacked. The boys watched, horrified as Stanley struggled against them. The hood of one creature fell back, revealing a skull with bits of stringy hair. Gnarled fingers tore at Stanley as he screamed, and then he fell silent. The teacher arrived, stumbling through the barbed wire fence, only to stop cold. He couldn't go any further. Moments later, the farmer returned, bringing policemen with him. The boys shouted, "They got him! They got him!" over and over again, pointing down to the field. The police rushed into the valley. The headmaster arrived soon after, and the boys were taken back to the school. Some of them were so traumatized they never returned. The teacher stayed behind with the police all night. At dawn, they found what was left of Stanley Jenkins at the bottom of the well. He had been ripped apart. His parents came to collect the remains. The farmer added another barbed wire fence around the field, posting large red signs that read "Danger" and "Keep out." Locals say the field is now haunted by 5 dark figures: 3 women, a man, and a boy. Story 2, Meat Cleaver. The year was 1889, and in the city of Victoria, Canada, there was a busy and overcrowded area known as Chinatown. In this area, there lived a young Chinese man named Chen. He was 17 years old, and he earned a meager living cleaning rooms and making beds in the American Hotel. Nearby, in a narrow little street called Fan Tan Alley, there lived a beautiful young Chinese girl by the name of Yao. She was very poor and had to support herself by working in a house of ill repute. The first time Chan laid eyes on her, he immediately fell in love. The young man came by many times to talk to her as she sat at her window in the evening. One day, he worked up the courage to propose to her. She thought he was joking and laughed at him. When she realized he really did want to marry her, she told him she couldn't leave her employer. She said her boss was a mean and violent man. If she left, he would hunt her down and kill her. Chan was determined and came back the next day with a vial of poison. He passed it to her through the window and told her to use it to kill her boss. "Pour it on his food," said Chan. "Okay, kill him and his wife. Then we can be together." The girl was shocked at this, and when she realized he was serious, she didn't want anything to do with him. After all, he was penniless. What kind of husband would he make? What kind of life could they have together? Also, she knew what the penalty for murder was. She told him to go away and never come back. She turned him down so brutally that the young man was humiliated. As he walked through the streets, he felt like everyone was laughing at him. For a while, he did stay away, but a few days later, he came back. And he had a friend with him. Chan and his friend crept around the building, keeping to the shadows so that Yao couldn't see them. The friend reached in the window and grabbed Yao by the hair. He pulled the poor girl halfway out and held her there. She was shouting and struggling. She didn't know what was going on. That's when she saw Chan come walking up. She watched in horror as he reached into his jacket and took out a huge meat cleaver. Yao let out a high-pitched scream as he raised the meat cleaver in the air and brought it crashing down with all his might. In one fell swoop, it sliced straight through her neck, and her head rolled along the cobblestones. It was pandemonium. There was blood everywhere. Chan fled, running for all he was worth through the maze of back streets and narrow alleys. People saw him come rushing towards them. He was covered in blood and holding the meat cleaver over his head. They dodged out of his way, convinced he was an escaped lunatic. The police offered a reward for his capture and put up posters all over Chinatown. Reward: $150 for information leading to the arrest of a young man wanted for murder in Chinatown. Acting on a tip-off, the police searched the American hotel and found Chan in the basement, hiding in the coal bin. He was arrested and thrown in jail. Just 2 days later, the young man took his shirt, wrapped it around his neck, and hanged himself in his cell. They say his ghost still runs down the back streets and alleyways of Chinatown at night. People hear footsteps approaching. Then suddenly, a young Chinese man emerges from the shadows. He comes right at them, covered in blood and wielding a butcher's meat cleaver. He pushes them out of the way and then disappears into the night. Many people in Victoria claim they have encountered this terrifying ghostly apparition, and he is most frequently seen in Fantan Alley. Story 3, Hairy Hands of Dartmoor. On a stretch of road in Dartmoor, United Kingdom, there have been many sightings for almost a century of a pair of disembodied hairy hands that appear suddenly, grab at the steering wheel of a moving car, and then force it off the road. Picture this, you're driving along the narrow, misty, moonlit moors. It's a dark, cold night. All of a sudden, the steering wheel or handlebars are grabbed by a gruesome pair of grotesque, hairy, calloused hands that are inhumanly strong and do their best to fight you for control of your car. That's a story that's been repeated many times since the first incident in 1921, when a Dartmoor prison guard was killed as his motorcycle went out of control and crashed. The tale was related by his children who were riding in the sidecar. All they heard was their father shouting at them to get off the bike, and apparently wrestling with the steering. They jumped clear. Their dad did not. This happened again when another motorcyclist and passenger were driven off the road at the same spot. This time, the passenger saw a large, hairy hand grab the handlebars and forcibly crash the bike. In 1924, a young couple were camping in a caravan in the area, and the woman was awoken in the middle of the night by a large disembodied hand covered in hair crawling up the outside of the caravan window. In her terror, the woman made the sign of the cross and the hand seemed to disappear. The tale has been heard again and again, and the area has become notorious for accidents. Many of the survivors giving the story of feeling or seeing the large, rough hands covered in hair, grabbing at them, and trying to crash their vehicle. Rumors abound that the hands are the ghost of an old man who was hit by a car and killed on that road, the ghost of a deceased Dartmoor prison inmate, or some kind of evil spirit wandering the moors. Whatever they are, it's certainly a good idea to take care if you find yourself driving around the lonely country roads of the UK. Story 4, Demon of Detroit. It all started in the early 1960s, when Mr. and Mrs. Adams moved into a house in Detroit, Michigan. They had 5 small children and a pet dog. Almost as soon as they moved in, the family sensed there was something wrong with the back bedroom. All of the children avoided it, and even the dog refused to go inside. It was a tiny room, with just enough space for a bed and a built-in closet in the corner. Mr. Adams worked the night shift at the Cadillac assembly plant, so when he came home in the morning, he would sleep in the back bedroom. It was far enough from the rest of the house that he thought no one would disturb him. However, sleeping in the bedroom always gave him a strange and uneasy feeling. Almost immediately, he began experiencing horrible nightmares. They were so vivid and real that he would wake up screaming and shaking with fear. In one of the ghastly nightmares, he dreamed that he opened the closet door and the blood-soaked, mutilated body of a woman fell out. As the days went by, the dreams became worse and worse. He lost so much sleep and grew so exhausted that he ended up moving back to the master bedroom with his wife. The nightmares suddenly stopped. When his mother came to visit the family, they let her sleep in the back bedroom. The next morning, she said she hadn't gotten a wink of sleep. Her face was pale, and her whole body was shaking. She claimed she had heard terrible sounds in the room all night long, as if someone were trying to break in. She refused to sleep in the bedroom again and decided to cut her visit short and go home. After that, Mr. and Mrs. Adams began to realize that something dark and loathsome was lurking in the back bedroom. Then, an old friend of the family came to town and they gave him the room for the night. They didn't mention anything about their own unpleasant experiences in the room. Shortly after midnight, the man was lying in bed when he was awakened by the feeling of someone turning him over. He opened his eyes and saw someone standing outside the bedroom door. It was a woman with long hair, but she had her back to him. She was wearing a short fur coat and a blue dress. He got up and started walking toward her, but all of a sudden, every light in the house went off. He was stumbling around in the darkness, and when the lights came back on again, he found himself in the kitchen. Mrs. Adams was there, washing her hair in the kitchen sink. Suddenly, they heard a terrible, unearthly wailing sound that left both of them speechless with fright, and a sickening smell filled the room. Then, the heavy trapdoor in the kitchen floor that led to the dirt basement began opening and slamming shut on its own. Terrified, they called the police. Within minutes, a few officers were searching the house from top to bottom, but they didn't find anything. The next morning, when Mr. Adams got home from the plant, his wife and friend were waiting for him. As calmly as they could, they told him what they had experienced during the night. He didn't believe them. That evening, he decided to sleep in the back bedroom. He was just about to drift off when he heard someone moving in the room. He thought it was his wife, but when he called her name, there was no answer. He turned over to look and saw a hideous face, just inches from him. It was the most horrible thing he had ever seen. The eyes stared past him and the mouth moved to speak, but all that came out was a hissing sound and a terrible stench. Mr. Adams came running out of the back bedroom, his eyes wide and screaming in terror. He was ripping handfuls of hair from his head as he ran. His friend tried to grab him and hold him down, but Mr. Adams went berserk, kicking and fighting. Finally, his wife and friend managed to throw a blanket over him and wrestle him to the floor. The house was filled with the same nauseating stench they had smelled the night before. An hour later, he had calmed down enough to tell his family about the ghastly and indescribable face he had seen. The husband and wife grabbed their sleeping children from their beds and fled into the night. The next morning, they all moved in with Mrs. Adams' parents in a different part of Detroit. The Adams family had to admit defeat, and they left the house and the back bedrooms to the horrific entity that was lurking in it. The Demon of Detroit. Story 5, Marble Statue. After my wife and I got married, we chose to spend our honeymoon in Ireland. We rented a small cottage nestled in a rural village in the south of the country. The cottage was a charming little stone house with only 4 rooms, its walls cloaked in ivy. It felt like the perfect country retreat for our 1-month stay. The owner of the cottage was a local woman named Mrs. Gorman. She visited daily to act as our housekeeper, cooking dinner and cleaning up. Over time, we became quite friendly with her, and on many evenings she entertained us with old Irish ghost stories and folklore. Not far from the cottage stood a large, desolate church, which we often visited in the evenings as the light began to fade. The path leading to the church wound through the woods and ended at the graveyard wall. Locals called it the Bier Walk, as it had once been the path used to carry the dead for burial. The church itself had a heavy oak door that was never locked. Inside, massive stone arches rose into the shadows, and moonlight streamed through the beautiful stained glass windows, casting soft, colored light on the cold stone floor. To the right of the altar, tucked into an alcove, stood a gray marble statue. It depicted a knight in armor lying on a stone slab, his hands gripping a massive sword. In the dim church light, the statue always seemed to glow with an eerie aura. No one knew the knight's name, but legends described him as a truly wicked man, guilty of unspeakable acts. They said God had cursed him, and his home had been struck by lightning. Gazing at his stern, cruel face carved in marble, it was easy to believe he had been evil. Still, I often wondered why such a man would be honored with a statue in a church. For the first 2 weeks of our honeymoon, everything was peaceful and idyllic. Back then, I enjoyed painting, and my wife loved writing short stories. Our days were filled with beauty and creativity. I would paint the rolling landscapes while she scribbled away in her notebook. At night, we'd sit by the fire and listen to Mrs. Gorman recount tales of the banshee, the Dullahan, and all sorts of strange things that wandered the night. But then, something changed. One day, Mrs. Gorman arrived with a solemn expression on her face. She told us she had to leave for a few days, but didn't explain why. My wife was unhappy about it, especially since she'd now have to cook and do the cleaning herself. Curious, I kept pressing Mrs. Gorman about the real reason for her sudden departure. Eventually, she relented. "I suppose I should tell you," she said in a low, serious voice. "There are some dark legends about this house. They say many wicked deeds were done here. The stories I've heard would chill your blood. If you visited the church, you may have seen the marble statue beside the altar." "You mean the knight in armor?" I asked. "I mean that evil thing carved from stone," she said. "They say on Halloween night that monster rises from his slab like a corpse rising from the grave, and when the church bell strikes 11, he walks out into the night, tramping over the graves and down the bier walk." "You don't really believe that, do you?" I asked. "Of course I do," she snapped. "I know people who've seen the marks of his feet on the path the next morning." "And where does he go?" I asked. "Where do you think?" She spat. "Back here to his home. This is where he lived when he was alive. And woe to anyone who crosses his path. If you're wise, you'll do as I say. Lock your doors on Halloween night and don't open them for anyone or anything." After that, she refused to say more. When she left, I didn't tell my wife about the legend of the walking statue. I didn't want to frighten her. On Halloween night, I decided to cook dinner for my wife as a treat. We sat by the fire, sharing a bottle of wine as a pale white mist curled around the cottage outside. Around 10 o'clock, my wife said she was tired and would head to bed soon. I was feeling restless, so I decided to step outside for some fresh air. I walked out the front door, leaving it unlocked behind me. The night had a strange, silvery glow. I wandered up and down the path, enjoying the stillness. Not a sound could be heard, no birds, no animals, not even the wind through the trees. On the horizon, I could see the black and gray outline of the church tower against the night sky. As the church bell began to strike 11, I glanced through the cottage window and saw my wife asleep on the sofa. I decided to take a short walk. As I strolled down the bier walk, I thought I heard a rustle behind me. I stopped and listened. Nothing. I kept walking. Again, I thought I heard footsteps. A deep sense of unease crept over me. I felt I was being followed, yet when I turned around, no one was there. When I reached the graveyard, I saw that the church door stood open. I stepped inside. It was then, as I walked slowly down the aisle, that I remembered the legend. This was the night the marble knight was said to rise. And then, by the faint light of the moon, I saw something that made me freeze. My blood turned to ice and a shiver ran through my body. The statue was gone. The stone slab was empty. Was I losing my mind? Was someone playing a cruel joke? Suddenly, a wave of horror crashed over me. Deep, nauseating terror. A dreadful premonition clutched at my heart. I fled the church, vaulted over the graveyard wall, and sprinted down the path. As I ran, a dark figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking my way. "Who are you?" I shouted. The figure stepped into the moonlight. It was the parish priest. "What's gotten into you?" he asked. "The statue. It's gone," I cried. "The marble knight. It's not there." He chuckled and said, "Sounds like someone's been listening to too many ghost stories." "I swear, I saw it with my own eyes," I insisted. "It's not there." "Well, then come with me and let's take another look," he said. We returned along the path, climbed over the graveyard wall, and went back into the church. Everything was deathly still. The air smelled of damp stone and decay. We walked slowly down the aisle. I kept my eyes shut, dreading what I wouldn't see. "Here it is," the priest said cheerfully. I opened my eyes. He was right. The statue lay in place once more. I let out a sigh of relief. "It must have been a trick of the light," I muttered. But then the priest leaned over and pointed at the statue. "Look," he said, "the hand is broken." And indeed, it was. When I got back to the cottage, the house was silent and dark. I called out, but got no answer. I turned on the lights, and that's when I saw her. My wife's feet were sticking out from behind the sofa. I rushed over. She was lying in a pool of blood. I collapsed to my knees, sobbing. She had been murdered. Her skull was crushed, her brains spilled across the floor. I held her lifeless hand in mine, and that's when I saw she was clutching something. Her fingers were locked tightly around it. I forced them open to see what she had been holding.